and the audience is sitting there, waiting expectantly, was something marvelous is going to happen.
She drove supply trucks with a loaded gun during World War II. She made grown men cry in poker games. She got B. Arthur so angry that America's favorite show had to end. This wasn't the Betty White you thought you knew. Behind that sweet smile was someone who chose her career over having children, who cut family members out forever, who manipulated her image so perfectly that even her co-stars were fooled. Her assistant just revealed what Betty was really doing those final days. Betty White was born on January 17, 1922, in Oak Park, Illinois. Her father, Horace Logan White, worked for the Crouse-Hinds Electric Company, a business that was changing how American cities were lit. When Betty was just 2 years old, the family moved to Los Angeles. This wasn't just a family decision. It was part of Crouse-Hinds' big push into the West Coast during the electric boom of the 1920s. While most families were struggling through the Great Depression, the Whites lived comfortably, thanks to Horace's executive role. They arrived in California right as Hollywood was becoming the movie capital of the world. It's strange to think that Betty, who would one day become a TV icon, was raised in a home powered by one of America's top lighting companies. That same company, now part of Eaton Corporation, still helps light up cities today. By the time she reached high school, Betty was already taking charge. At Beverly Hills High in 1939, she didn't just act in the senior graduation play, she rewrote it. She directed it, starred in it, and assigned roles like a general giving orders. Her classmates jokingly called her Little Napoleon. The play, a sharp comedy poking fun at Hollywood, shocked the audience. Some actual Hollywood stars were there, and they saw themselves being roasted on stage. The local paper called Betty's performance unnervingly mature. She was only 17, but already fearless in calling out powerful people with humor. Just 2 years later, when World War II broke out, Betty didn't sit back. She joined the American Women's Voluntary Services and drove supply trucks around rough parts of Santa Monica and Hollywood. She was 19, alone at night, carrying candy, cigarettes, and even a loaded .38 revolver. She logged more than 15,000 miles in service and wasn't afraid to stand up to drunk or aggressive soldiers. In one incident, she physically pulled a man off a younger volunteer. Betty's sweet image came years later, but this tough, gritty side was always there. She'd learned how to handle dangerous situations with confidence and calm. That confidence was shaped partly by her heritage. Her mother, Christine, came from a mixed background: Greek, Danish, English, and Welsh. Christine's Greek family had escaped poverty in Thessaloniki in 1898 and settled in Chicago's Greek town. From her Greek roots, Betty inherited a sense of drama and sharp wit. The Danish influence made her practical and grounded. Her English side brought a love of performance, and her Welsh blood added a rebellious streak. Betty once admitted she often felt like she was playing different versions of herself, depending on the setting. A 2010 DNA test revealed her ancestry was 31% English, 28% Danish, 23% Greek, and 18% Welsh, a mix that seemed to perfectly match her unpredictable personality. Before most Americans had even seen a television, Betty was already on it. In 1939, at just 17, she appeared in an experimental TV broadcast in Los Angeles. It reached about 300 homes. She wasn't even supposed to perform. She was just supporting a friend who backed out at the last minute. Betty stepped in and sang "On the Good Ship Lollipop." One reviewer described her performance as surprisingly sophisticated. That kinescope recording burned in a 1971 fire, but the moment was real. Betty had entered TV history before it had even begun. Betty's love life, however, started with chaos. In 1945, she married Air Force pilot Dick Barker. But this wasn't a love story. It was a blunt physical decision. In her words, "We wanted to sleep together." It lasted just 6 months. After he left the military, Barker moved Betty to his family's chicken farm in Ohio. She hated it. She was expected to kill chickens for dinner. As a lifelong animal lover, she said, "No way." They divorced the same year they married. Her next marriage wasn't much better. In 1947, she married Lane Allen, a Hollywood agent. But when he asked her to quit acting and start a family, she left. She didn't want kids. She wanted a career. The divorce came in 1949, the same year she landed her first big break on TV. That timing wasn't accidental. She joined Hollywood on television in 1949, at first playing the assistant to host Al Jarvis. The show aired 5 hours a day, 6 days a week. Most men couldn't handle the grind. Jarvis quit in 1951, and his replacement, Eddie Albert, left after just 6 months. But Betty stayed. When no one else could keep up, she took over. Soon, she was the only host. She didn't wait to be invited to power. She took it. She turned the exhausting schedule into her advantage, gradually adding scripted scenes that would later form the basis of her own show. In 1952, Betty made another bold move. She formed her own company, Bandy Productions, named after her dog. She partnered with George Tibbles and Don Fedderson, not just to act, but to produce her own sitcom. That show, Life with Elizabeth, launched in 1952, made her one of the very first women to produce a sitcom. She called the shots, writing, producing, and starring. And when NBC picked up her next show in 1954, she refused to cave to pressure from Southern stations who objected to a black performer, Arthur Duncan, being featured. Betty didn't just refuse to fire him, she gave him more airtime. "I'm sorry. Live with it," she said. She wasn't just kind, she was strategic. That same year, she won a local Emmy for Life with Elizabeth. It was a huge deal. She wasn't just winning for acting, she was being recognized for controlling every part of the show. This win gave her power. She used it to negotiate full creative control over The Betty White Show at NBC. She didn't see awards as rewards. She saw them as tools. Each trophy was another step up the ladder. In 1961, she appeared on the game show Password. It looked like a typical guest appearance, but it changed her life. That's where she met the host, Alan Ludden. The chemistry was instant. She said later, "We felt like we knew each other." He fell for her fast and proposed within weeks. But Betty? She said no. Again and again. For a whole year, she turned him down. Even when he gave her a diamond ring, she refused it. So, Ludden wore the ring around his neck. She wouldn't move to New York. She wouldn't give in. It wasn't coldness. It was strategy. She wanted to stay in control. But on Easter in 1963, something cracked. He sent her a stuffed white bunny with gold leaves in its ears, ruby, diamond, and sapphire earrings tucked inside. The note read, "Please say yes." She finally did. Years later, she said it was her biggest regret, not saying yes sooner. But the wait led to an 18-year marriage that lasted until his death in 1981. Underneath that gentle smile was someone shockingly competitive. Her friends knew it during their poker nights. She loved a game called Screw Thy Neighbor, a ruthless card game where players tried to stick each other with bad hands. Betty thrived in it. There was a trophy, a brass cup engraved with Pico Poker Club. Whoever won got to keep it until the next game. But if they forgot to bring it back, the penalty was $2,000 or death, whichever is more appropriate. That was Betty's rule. It was funny. But it also showed she played to win and didn't mind using intimidation, all while acting sweet. Since she often got to pick the game, she chose her favorite version where she had the upper hand. The real Betty wasn't just playing cards. She was playing people and winning. Even her wedding became a strategic move. Betty and Alan didn't get a honeymoon. He had to get back to work on Password. But Betty made sure their wedding still made headlines. She pulled a string no one else could. Jack Parr, the legendary host of The Tonight Show, had always refused to appear on Password. He never said yes until Betty asked. He came on as a gift for their wedding. Just once. Just for them. It wasn't just sentimental. It was smart. Ratings shot up. Viewers tuned in. And Betty proved again that she had the kind of pull that made things happen in Hollywood. That kind of influence wasn't luck. In 1983, Betty became the first woman to win a Daytime Emmy for Outstanding Game Show Host. She beat Dick Clark and Richard Dawson. And she did it with a show that only aired for 65 episodes, Just Men. It ran from January 3 to April 1st, just 3 months. But that's all Betty needed. The format was perfect for her. 2 women had to predict how 7 male celebrities would answer yes or no questions. Betty's quick wit and sharp timing carried the show, even though it aired in a terrible noon slot when most viewers were watching the news. She made it work. She got another nomination in 1984, but even that short-lived show had already made history. 10 years earlier, she almost missed one of her biggest roles. In 1973, The Mary Tyler Moore Show needed a new character for episode number 73. The script described her as an icky, sweet Betty White type. The producers were nervous. Betty was already close friends with Mary Tyler Moore and her husband, Grant Tinker. What if she auditioned and wasn't right? It would be awkward. But casting director Ethel Wynant didn't overthink it. She just called Betty. That call turned into one of the show's most iconic characters, Sue Ann Nivens. Her first appearance was meant to be a one-off. But after the taping, James L. Brooks pulled her aside and said, "Don't make too many plans." He knew. Everyone knew. Betty had nailed it. Sue Ann wasn't just another role. She was a mirror, one Betty carefully crafted. On screen, Sue Ann was the perfect homemaker, hosting segments like A Salute to Fruit and What's All This Fuss About Famine? But underneath, she was man-obsessed, sarcastic, and cold. Betty once said, "You can't get much more rotten than the neighborhood nymphomaniac." She leaned into the role. She played it with layers. Audiences laughed, but they also squirmed. And that's what made it work. Sue Ann wasn't just funny. She was brilliant commentary wrapped in charm. Betty's role didn't just entertain. It won her 2 consecutive Emmys in 1975 and 1976 for Outstanding Supporting Actress. She joined the main cast in the 5th season after Valerie Harper left. The timing was perfect. Betty made sure Sue Ann could carry stories on her own. Even in the final season, when she had less screen time, she still got nominated. That's how deeply she had embedded herself in the show's success. But it wasn't just talent, it was politics too. She built strong relationships with writers, with producers, and she was careful never to overshadow Mary Tyler Moore. She played the long game, on screen and off. After the Mary Tyler Moore Show ended in 1977, Betty didn't disappear. She showed up where it mattered. Her appearances on The Carol Burnett Show weren't random. They were timed, planned. She used them to stay in the spotlight during that uncertain time between major roles. In a 1976 sketch, she played Eunice's snobby sister Ellen, snarky, cold, hilarious. In another, She played an old woman at a college reunion, showing she could stretch across age ranges. These roles weren't just for laughs. They were career chess moves, each one keeping her relevant, each one leading her closer to the Golden Girls. Betty White and Rue McClanahan were supposed to play the opposite roles. Everyone assumed the director had a last-minute change of heart. That wasn't true. Producers actually wanted Betty as Blanche and Rue as Rose. It made perfect sense. Betty had already played the man-hungry Sue Ann Nivens, while Rue was known as the sweet, scatterbrained friend on Maude. But behind the scenes, Betty wasn't happy. She didn't want to play another seductive character. She'd done that for years. She wanted something new. So she lobbied, quietly, but effectively. Rue later said she was thrilled when the director asked her to switch roles during her audition. What she didn't know was that Betty had already made it happen. It wasn't random, it was strategic, and it changed television forever. Betty became Rose, naive, innocent, and lovable, and audiences adored her. That role gave her the freedom to reshape her image while avoiding a trap that had ruined many actresses, being stuck in the same type of character forever. But her influence didn't stop there. The show's salary negotiations were a battlefield. Bea Arthur earned the most in the beginning, thanks to her earlier TV success. But Betty White wasn't just happy to be on the show. She wanted control. She pushed for equal pay, producer credits, and even a say in how her character was written. By the final season, Rue was making over $1 million a year, which would be around $2.5 to $3 million today. Betty used her early Emmy win in 1986 to leverage more power. She knew how to turn popularity into money. And it worked. After the show ended, syndication made Betty richer than anyone expected. Reports say she earned about $3 million a year from reruns. Her co-stars made similar amounts, but her estate continues to benefit because of the contract terms she fought for during the show's run. People saw Rose as simple, but Betty wasn't. She was sharp, strategic, and always one step ahead. Rose Nyland was the show's punching bag. Dorothy insulted her intelligence. Blanche mocked her cluelessness. But viewers loved her. And that wasn't by accident. Betty let her character take the hits because she knew it made her more likable. She became the heart of the show. While Bea Arthur grew tired of jokes about her looks and love life, Betty leaned into Rose's goofy innocence. The more Rose was mocked, the more audiences wanted to protect her. That gave Betty power, not just on screen, but in story meetings too. Her ridiculous St. Olaf stories became fan favorites. They were quoted everywhere. By making herself the underdog, she became untouchable. But all that power came with a price. The real reason the Golden Girls ended wasn't just Bea Arthur leaving. It was the growing tension with Betty White. By 1992, things behind the scenes had turned toxic. Betty's demands had grown too big. She wanted producer credits, final say on Rose's storylines, and more attention. Between takes, she'd chat with the live audience, which Bea found disrespectful. But it was a calculated move. Betty used that connection with fans as leverage. When season 7 wrapped, Bea had enough. She wasn't just tired, she was fed up. The scripts were getting weaker. The jokes about Dorothy were relentless. And working with Betty had become unbearable. NBC could have tried to replace her, but instead, they pulled the plug. It wasn't worth the drama anymore. Outside the show, Betty's personal life was just as complicated. She married Lane Allen in 1947, but it didn't last. He wanted kids. She didn't. That was non-negotiable. She knew her future was in television, not parenting. By 1949, they divorced. It wasn't just a disagreement. It was a deep divide. In the 1940s, women weren't supposed to choose career over children, but Betty did, and she paid the emotional cost. When she married Alan Ludden in 1963, she became stepmother to his 3 kids. One of them, Martha, never accepted her. Their relationship was so bad they didn't speak for 30 years. Even when Martha tried to make peace, Betty shut the door. Friends said Betty believed Martha made Alan's final years harder, and she never forgave her for it. Then came 1981. Alan Ludden died just 3 days before their 18th anniversary. He had stomach cancer. Betty had been by his side, between rehearsals, hospital visits, and public appearances. After his death, she said she'd never remarry. "Once you've had the best, who needs the rest?" she told reporters. But there was another truth behind the tears. His death also freed her from compromise. From then on, her time, her focus, her energy, all went to her work and her animals. That's where she poured her love. In 2025, Sally Struthers went public with a story she had held back for years. She said Betty invited her to a game show meeting at her home. When Struthers reached for a cookie, Betty smiled sweetly and said, "I wouldn't do that if I were you, dear. You don't need a cookie." It was cutting, it was public, and it wasn't a joke. Sally called her very passive-aggressive. It matched other behind-the-scenes reports. Betty had a way of using charm as control. She dressed her dominance in politeness. But make no mistake, she always had the upper hand. And when people didn't fall in line, she cut them out. Her stepdaughter Martha wasn't the only casualty. Betty's need for control destroyed friendships too. She didn't forgive. She didn't forget. When people disappointed her or crossed her, she erased them. No second chances. Her public image was all warmth, but privately, she kept tight boundaries. If you challenged her, you were gone. Betty White didn't just survive in Hollywood, she outplayed it. When she showed up on Boston Legal from 2005 to 2008, most people thought it was just another fun guest role. But she knew exactly what she was doing. She was working beside James Spader and William Shatner on a show that got 26 Emmy nominations. And she wasn't just there to act. She was sending a message. The woman who once ruled the Golden Girls wasn't going to fade into the background of a youth-obsessed industry. She used the legal drama's serious tone and strong writing to prove she could do more than comedy. It wasn't just a role. It was her re-entry into relevance. Then, in 2009, at age 87, she dropped a bombshell in The Proposal. She stole scenes from Ryan Reynolds and Sandra Bullock like it was nothing. In one moment, she walked off with a Samoyed puppy during rehearsal. It seemed like a spontaneous joke, but it wasn't. She later said she didn't even think about it. She just acted. Nobody stopped her. That move ended up in the final cut and became one of the movie's most talked about moments. It wasn't luck. It was instinct sharpened by decades of performing. Hollywood had labeled her a memory from the past, but she forced them to admit Betty still had it. And just when people thought they had her figured out, she flipped the script again. In 2010, a Facebook campaign took off. Betty White to host SNL. Within weeks, hundreds of thousands had joined. NBC gave in. But behind the scenes, it didn't feel so random. It felt too perfect. Just a few weeks earlier, she'd appeared in a Snickers commercial during the Super Bowl. It was a viral hit. The campaign, her hosting date, May 8th, and the return of SNL legends like Tina Fey and Maya Rudolph all seemed a bit too coordinated. She joked she'd beat up the guy who started the petition, but she knew what had just happened. She used the internet better than people half her age. The result? A ratings boost, a viral moment, and an Emmy win. That's not a comeback. That's strategy. She wasn't done yet. Hot in Cleveland premiered in 2010. Betty White, then 88, wasn't just acting. She got executive producer credit. The show became the biggest hit TV land ever had. 128 episodes, 6 seasons. Her character, Elka, was more than comic relief. She was the show. Critics loved her. She got SAG awards. Behind the scenes, her producer credit meant power, creative decisions, money, control. She'd spent decades watching men take credit. Now, she was taking her own. At an age when most actors fade out, she doubled down. But behind the curtain, things weren't as perfect as they seemed. Just days before her death on December 31, 2021, Betty was still telling the press she felt so good and was in such good health. The truth was different. She had memory issues, mobility struggles, and rarely left home during the pandemic, not just out of caution, but because her body was failing. Her longtime assistant Kirsten Michaelis helped keep the image alive. Every public photo, every message was carefully managed. To the world, Betty still sparkled. Privately, she was fading. Her final word shocked the world. Alan. People swooned over the idea that she was calling out to her late husband, Alan Ludden. But those close to her knew the truth might be heavier. Betty had married Ludden in 1963. He died of cancer in 1981. She never remarried. She once said, "When you've had the best, who needs the rest?" But she'd also spent years away from him, chasing work, choosing career over time together. Saying his name might not have been about romance. It might have been regret. Then came the stroke. On Christmas Day 2021, Betty suffered a major stroke. 6 days before she died. It was never announced. Her team said nothing. Just 5 days before, she had filmed what would be her final video message for fans, dressed up and smiling, promoting her 100th birthday celebration. Her death certificate listed the stroke as the cause. She had stayed alert and coherent afterward, but there was no saving her. Her team protected the image until the very end. What happened next left fans divided. A documentary titled Betty White, 100 Years Young, had already been filmed. Her final message was part of it. After her death, the team had a choice: cancel it or release it. They chose to go ahead. On January 17, 2022, what would have been her 100th birthday, the film played in 1,500 cinemas. It made serious money. Some said it honored her. Others called it a cash grab. Either way, the cameras were still rolling. And Betty's final thank you was turned into a box office event. At the center of all of this stood her assistant, Kirsten Michaelis. She was there when Betty died. She ran her day-to-day life, managed her social media, handled her press, and protected her legacy. She shared one of the last photos ever taken of Betty, December 20th, 2021. Just 11 days before she passed. She said Betty was radiant that day. After her death, Michaelis became the gatekeeper of Betty's image. She now controls Betty's online presence, and with it, the secrets no one else knows. But she's never told them. Because Betty knew how to pick people, and how to keep control, even from beyond the grave. Betty White's greatest role wasn't Rose Nyland or Sue Ann Nivens. It was Betty White, the icon. She built that character herself, starting back in 1949 when she first moved to television. She knew how to smile, how to deflect, how to play the sweet grandma even when she was the smartest person in the room. She was ruthless when needed, competitive without showing it, and always one step ahead. Even when she played naughty roles, the public still saw her as innocent Betty. It wasn't just luck, it was image manipulation at the highest level. And that image gave her power. Other celebrities feared her, not because she was mean, but because she knew everything. She had dirt on everyone and never needed to use it. She had been one of the first women in TV to own her own production company back in the 1950s. She built relationships with executives, agents, and stars across generations. When Betty White backed you, your career got a boost. When she stayed silent, people noticed. She could start a trend or end one with just a smile or a joke.